So I went off to college. When I went to college in England, that was my chance to work really, really hard to get rid of my native accent. I didn't want to sound like a country hick, and most of the time I don't these days. If you ever get me talking, however, about SEC football or telling stories around a campfire, we'll just fluff my biscuits. This old hillbilly's going to come right out. It ain't the deepest of the South with plantations and red dirt, but I am from the hills of Arkansas, deep hills of Arkansas, with all the pine trees and poverty and backwardsness that has been stereotyped in there for a good reason. Arkansas is not the most poor state. It is not the least educated state. It is not the most aggressively cruel political state out there, but they're really high on all those lists of very shameful things. Arkansas is number one at one thing. So, Georgia and Mississippi, all those, we are number one in teenage pregnancy for as long as people have been able to count on their fingers. So take that, Mississippi. That's the fights all the time there, yeah. So my origin story as a Razorback. My mother was literally barefoot and pregnant, living in a one-room shack that they had built with their hands. She was tired of that outhouse, and so they traded that whole land for a proper trailer with one of those indoor flush toilets, one of those newfangled things in 1977. When I would visit my father, he would teach me how to skin possum while sitting on the tailgate of one of the four 1964 Fords. One of them always ran, and three of them were up on blocks, so the stereotypes of Arkansas is right there. My godparents, they did not know their letters past spelling their names, but they would sit with me as I was fixated on Sesame Street. And we would all be splitting peas into whatever our little buckets were, and they'd be spitting chaw into that bucket over there. On Sundays, they'd take me to the Baptist church where I had a tendency, you might not believe it, but I had a tendency to get in trouble a lot in Sunday school. One of these days, I've been saving a sermon my entire life about why I got kicked out of Sunday school, but today's not the day. But I learned fast as a youngster that if you've done something so wrong in church that you got a spanking in church, you were going to have to cut your own switch when you got home. It was a double. You get twice the punishment on Sundays. And that was, some of you don't understand what that is, but those of you who can nod along with cutting your own switch, you know. So those are the hills that I'm from. Those are my roots. As I got closer to adulthood, I spent many summers and many years out in the mountains in the Piedmont of North Carolina. In high school, I went to a church camp out there called Montreat. In college, I worked at that church camp at Montreat. And then when I became a youth pastor, I brought my teenagers to go to camp back at Montreat. That's where I was this weekend, sitting on porches, rocking on rocking chairs, listening to the cicadas. So I know the South. I know it. It's a lot of my roots. And yet, for some of you who go back there, you might understand this. Every time I go back, I walk off the plane, and I just get that first little hint of local culture, and I think, where am I? What planet is this? How is this still here? The minute I start driving away from the airport and seeing all the Chick-fil-A's and other things broken down, who are these people? How did I get from here to here? And why have so many people in the South, when there's so much great about it, why have they decided to hold so tightly to the worst things about their culture and their history? It's like there are these, and all of you get to this place at some point, but there are these threads of your past, lots of these little threads of your past that get braided together. And when we unravel them, we find some of them are really beautiful, and you can be really grateful. I'm really grateful. The South should be really proud of how polite people are, and there's some great music down there. But other threads you pull out of your past are so ugly and have been so painful, and they continue to break people. Imagine if any of us, our lives or our cultures, if we could really pull apart all those threads and just put some of them over here and then weave the rest back, holy and healed. Imagine if the South could just be grits and magnolia trees and slow rhythms all in one tangle, and you leave off the heat and the racism and the violent authority. It's a dream. So one day last week, we were heading to the beach with that dream. We were on the boardwalk before you get to the sand, so this is the time to put on your 100 proof. Mine is 100 SPF because of me. This is the time when you get your towels and you get your books and you get everything ready to go walk on the sand and find out if the sand's too hot for your feet, little wimpy feet. And this local woman, pure South Carolina. I mean, she was made of barbecue and palmetto tattoos, and there's nothing on this flat earth that could get rid of her accent. She was aiming to get her 3-year-old with the sunscreen and the little toys. She was trying to corral one 3-year-old. And this kid is distracted, like throwing the flip-flop over here, and chasing the lizard over there. Florida, you got lizards. Those are fun to chase. So the mom yells out. She says, "Get over here, sugar booger." And I'd never heard sugar booger. But it is poetic, isn't it? It really has a ring to it. This woman, you could just tell, she drinks sweet tea. She watches NASCAR. Her kitchen, I'll bet you $1, in her kitchen there's a towel that says, "I love Jesus, but I cuss a lot." So later, she continued to yell on the beach for the next 3 hours, her and her family. And she made it abundantly clear that those threads in her life, she's also very tangled up with the threads of Confederate flags, and those migrants took our jobs, and all the nonsense that comes with that. At the same time, there's something hopeful. There's something, maybe it's holy, about sort of wishing that we could see people and just kind of judge them on the best of them. There's something holy about wanting to take out those ugly threads and kind of squint so you don't have to think about those. And I hear it all the time. I hear people say, "Oh, they're good people." And those people, they might be awful people. They might do awful things. They might advocate to hurt in awful ways. And yet we say they're good people. And that might be on the edge of forgiveness. It might be on the edge of naive. But a lot of us try to treat people according to the story that some of the threads tell, and we just kind of try to let the other ones away. And I hope you can do that for me, even as I struggle to tell the story of this woman with just her best threads. Now, off the coast, we leave the Carolina coast, and we get into the countryside, covered in kudzu and all kinds of churches. The boiled peanut signs are not up yet because that harvest is a little later, but there were churches. Yeah, we counted. There were Baptist churches, there were Southern Baptist churches, there were Free Will Baptist churches, there were Bible Fellowship Baptist churches, Independent Baptist churches, there were Black Baptist church. We even saw a big old Progressive American Baptist church smack in Charlotte. And in all those churches, I can guarantee you that Sunday mornings look a lot different than they do in here, right? Has anyone been to a Baptist church recently? Anyone want to come up to the altar and pray and get saved in a Presbyterian church? That'll never happen. Yeah. It is different in all those churches than it is here and amongst each other. It's a lot different. Just go down the street to our neighbors at the LDS Ward. It's going to be different. And that's going to be different if we go in that direction. We go to the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church or the Muslim mosque or the Jewish synagogue. Not to mention if you want to go to an ashram or a temple of any kind of house of worship you can imagine. How people gather for worship, all different places, all different traditions, looks so different. Different rituals, different messages, different ideas about who God is and who we're supposed to be. And in some ways, those experiences, maybe there's nothing more diverse in our cultures than how we worship on Sunday morning. Everywhere from sugar booger to oh my heck to all are welcome. It's all different. We're so different, and maybe most of all when it comes to these structures of religion. And yet, as people, all of us have busier lives than ever. Seems like that's the way the world is. There's more distrust in the world for religious organizations than ever, for good reason. Pews are less full across America than they've ever been in the history of people counting. And still, with all that, in general, more people participate in worship online than ever have happened. More people go to meditation retreats than has ever existed in this country. More people read a diversity of spiritual literature than ever in this country. And the research says that more people actually have, quote, spiritual experiences outside of church than ever in the history of the world. 1970s, about 80% of people came to church at least once a week. Now that number's down around 20%. 1967, about 13% of people said that they have a spiritual experience once a year. Now that number's up over 60%. Good news, bad news. As different as we are, people across the board, we are all searching for something sacred, something deeper, something more. In such a dizzying array of styles, later this afternoon you could hear Pastor Issa's congregation singing. It's different than how we sing. In all these styles, we are searching for more in our life, for something deeper, something better, and we are searching together, and we are searching in places where other people have found something holy. We're trying to catch lightning bugs back in the bottle once again. And as different as we all are, there's something so similar about how our hearts long for a connection to the heartbeat of grace and love and joy and hope. A friend of mine back at Harvard Divinity School, she was part of this study. It's just a brilliant study. Step one, the question was, what do people find in diverse religious spaces across time, across tradition? Just whatever a preacher preaches, whatever people believe, whatever we do in worship, what actually gets accomplished? Or kind of crudely, what do you get? What do you get out of this? What's the return? Whether it's suburban Presbyterian or rural Pentecostal or whatever. To my friend and her research team, they ended up with 7 answers, 7 categories of things that tend to happen in all faith communities, whether it's Shinto or Lutheran or pagan, in America or Africa or Asia, whether they define themselves as conservative or liberal or they never want to talk about it, whether it's thriving in 1950 or struggling in 2020. The way my friend's team sliced it up, whether any of us feel this, step 1 identifies 7 threads that tend to get braided together in almost any faith community. And those braids get weaved in all kinds of different practices and ideas about God, kingdom of heaven up, afterlife, kingdom of heaven on, all this stuff. Their claim starts out, if we look close to any group, us and anyone, we're all searching for peace and hope and a better life. And there's almost an underlying structure to how that goes about. I don't know whether that says more about faith or about people. The claim is that the flesh and blood aims for the sweet by and by, and we do it kind of in similar ways. So the second step of their study is about modern times, what happens when those threads get untangled, and then other groups, not churches, try to put them back together, which is really cool. We'll get to that eventually. But first, primarily, I want to peel back those layers of how we gather and see if we can learn what is at the heart of worship. So first thread, to the question, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What are we doing on Sunday mornings here? What are we doing? Answer 1 is we come here to ask, what are we doing with life? That's it. What are we doing here? We're here to ask together, what are we doing in this one great world that we live in? This is part of the essential toolbox that faith communities share, is getting to ask, not answer, not necessarily answer, but we wouldn't be the church if we didn't once in a while get to the point of, what's the point of it all? What does it all mean? And maybe more so, some of you like these big existential questions, but everyone has asked, however young you are, once or a million times, what's my point? What do I do with this one beautiful life that I get to live? Or maybe in sanctified language, what's my purpose? Why am I here? What am I called to do? Churches and religious communities, however different they are, we serve as a platform for guidance and for grace to consider together meaning and purpose. And when churches offer those answers, the answers are all over the map. Some places you'll go, they'll say, what's the purpose of life? There is no purpose, so accept it and be saved. Others say, what's the purpose of life? Here's a list of 600 rules, and if you follow all of them, maybe you'll be saved. Some of the churches, they have all these crazy answers. Even in your life, you may have had different answers for what's my calling, what's my point. But as fundamental aspect of this journey toward the Spirit, this first thread of how we gather seems to be that we are here to create space to wonder together about the sacred nature of life and how each of us are best suited to live it. Now, what Mark read is an attempt to answer that question about 2,500 years ago in one specific context. It was transformative for that context, and it is so powerful that it's lived on in religious tradition, Jewish and Christian religious traditions. The prophet Jeremiah, he knew that his people felt stuck. They were overwhelmed. He knew they were confused, and they thought, if this is as good as it gets, what's the point? And if there's no point, maybe there's no God. And if there's no God, so he had to give an answer to that. Maybe you've been there, maybe you are there. So Jeremiah could tell they were scared because all of a sudden, life didn't add up. They had a formula for how life, and then it didn't add up. And he said to them, when you gather, first thread, I want you to remember that God has a plan, meaning, and you have a calling, purpose. That's what you read. You can go back and look at that, Jeremiah 29. That's kind of the system there. He says, you are facing enormous challenges, and there has been despair. There will be emptiness competing for your attention. But he says, God is on your side. It might not make sense. It might not be believable. You might be so overwhelmed that it just feels like a lie. But God is drawing all things back together, even the bad things, even the bad. God isn't making the bad things, but our God is a God of putting pieces back together. And hope is the capacity to look for how those things keep getting put back together. And this is a place where we can keep building that capacity of hope. Now, faith does not have all the answers. No faith, any faith that says they have all the answers is a lying faith. But our tradition does tell us boldly that you deserve a future of hope. You have a future of well-being and not of continual brokenness. It tells us to keep an open heart for wonder, and you will find peace. And this is a promise I trust. That is a promise you are invited to as we gather together. May it be so.